introduce the series. MD 101. That's what we're going to be doing. People from the Discord are going to recognize this as the what do long because I'm really good at naming things. And it's basically just a little booklet that we made, like an information packet, explaining a lot of maladaptive daydreaming stuff. So this is going to be the like spoken word video format style of that written document. It's not written by professionals. It's just written by a bunch of people on the Discord, mostly me. So don't go thinking this is like a definitive, thing. And I don't plan any of my videos, so it might be a little bit all over the place, but this is what we're doing. So we'll start at the beginning, the most boring part that everybody already knows, MD defined. And maybe you don't know what MD already is, but if you're on this channel, I'm betting you do. Like, this channel doesn't go out to people who don't already know what it is. If you don't already know what it is, like, hi, welcome. I hope you learned something. It's just not my usual audience. Anyway, so MD is defined as extensive fantasy activity that replaces human interaction and interferes with interpersonal, academic, or vocational functioning. That's like official definition of it that you will find in its origin source, a 2002 paper by Ellie Sommer, which I'll link below. And is the definition you can still find on, like Wikipedia or whatever. Anybody who's defining maladaptive daydreaming is going to use this definition, unless they're just talking from their personal experience. So, boiled down, we might say that maladaptive daydreaming is daydreaming that has a negative impact on your life. In order for something to be a disorder, it needs to cause distress or dysfunction. That's kind of covered by the maladaptive part. If you're not experiencing any distress or dysfunction, you are a non pathological immersive daydreamer. All maladaptive daydreamers are immersive daydreamers. It's not in that sentence that I said before. I guess it kind of alludes to it with the word extensive, but to be a maladaptive daydreamer, you need to daydream with a sense of absorption, of vividness, of immersion. They're not normal, fleeting, flat daydreams that are more typical of like, casual mind wandering and stuff. These are more like fantasy. They're vivid in some way. They're affect laden, which means emotional. They have depth to them. It's a normal trait to have, to be born with, so we believe. And then, most people will live just fine with it for the rest of their lives and like just have a really cool hobby or thing they can do or whatever. A really rich imagination. And then some of them will turn into maladaptive daydreamers because they rely too heavily on their MD to cope or something, and then it outgrows its ability to help you as a coping skill, and you're just all this left, like it helped you get through the thing, but now it's just like, uh, uh, maybe we'll go over that in a different part. I can't remember. I didn't really look too closely at the contents, the table of contents. And then the other thing that makes it maladaptive daydreaming is that last part uh, that it interferes with academic, social, or vocational functioning. That's the distress and dysfunction part. So those are kind of the two things that you have to be a maladaptive daydreamer. Distress and dysfunction, sense of immersion, dissociative absorption, it's called. MD is also chronic and persistent, and it has a variety of other symptoms. The pacing, the music, the urges. Um, I have a whole other video on the diagnostic criteria. You do not need to have all the symptoms, it's you have to have the big ones and then like an additional one to meet the criteria for maladaptive daydreaming. But that's what it is. Recurrent, distressing, extensive, or absorptive. Now, is it a disorder or not? No, maybe. Who knows? Like, that's where we're at. Who knows? We don't know. Science will figure it out eventually. Right now, MD researchers are kind of conceptualizing it as its own unique disorder. But I don't know. They're not the be all end all of psychology like other hopefully other researchers will become interested in this topic and put their own skills to work on figuring it out, and at the end of it hopefully it will be classified as something. I know you'll see around a lot of people saying MD is this, MD is that. It's just a coping skill. It's a behavioral addiction. It's dissociation. It's definitely a disorder. It's a symptom of other disorders. It's just a bad habit. Nobody knows. Well, I mean, in their heart of hearts, they might know for themselves, but nobody's got a stack of peer reviewed papers to back them up on that. I mean, a little bit, sure. Go check out the ICMDR. There will be listed all kinds of papers. There are papers talking about maladaptive daydreaming and OCD traits, maladaptive daydreaming as a dissociative disorder, maladaptive daydreaming as a behavioral addiction, maladaptive daydreaming and its relationship to ADHD. Hopefully, in the near future, we're actually going to have brain scans of people in maladaptive daydreaming states. It's an exciting time. But when you really boil it down, like, no, there is no solid body of work that we can point to and be like, that guy definitely figured it out, 100%. It is this. Soon, though, soon. What we know right now is that it's different from other types of daydreaming. It is different from the immersive daydreaming that I said. Well, it's not different from immersive daydreaming. We are immersive daydreamers, but we're the ones who experience the negative effects. Um, so it's not completely independent from immersive daydreamers. We are a subset of immersive daydreamers. And it's different from fantasy prone personality. How, Jammer? Well, one's conceptualized as a personality trait, the other's conceptualized as a disorder. They're not really, you know, they're different things. They're just different things. But fantasy prone personality was never it was never meant to imply pathology. There's also some other weird things with fantasy prone. Like they believe in aliens and stuff, which maladaptive daydreamers don't tend to do. I know I said that weird with the alien thing, but like the fantasy prone personalities they're prone to magical thinking and like hypnotization, being hypnotized. They're easily hypnotized, I guess, as a group. Um, so they do have some weird, like, I mean, you can see the 80s like shining through. Yeah, my God, a lot of crack in the 80s. What else? It's also not delusions or anything like that. I don't know why people conflate those two. They're very different. You can go look up delusions on your own, but it's not daydreaming. They're not intrusive thoughts. There is a lot of rumination and a lot of dwelling, and sometimes the daydreams can be distressing, but generally the daydreams themselves are not the distressing part. It's all the other stuff that comes along, attached to that behavior. And they're not typical daydreams. They're not fleeting. They're not fleeting flights of fancy that you can just let go as soon as they come. The sort of, default that your mind sets to. A lot of maladaptive daydreamers say that they have both kinds of daydreams. They have the MD daydreams and they have regular normal daydreams that they don't care about, just like everyone else in the world does. So they're pretty easy to tell apart from those as well. So they're kind of their own little thing. But the main takeaway is the distress and dysfunction. That's really what sets it apart from all other things. And that is what we're going to talk about in part two. Part two, distress and dysfunction. So, the takeaway from the last part was that what really sets maladaptive daydreaming apart from other types of daydreaming is the negative impact on the life, the maladaptive nature of it, the distress and dysfunction. Distress and dysfunction is a word combo that you're going to see a lot in mental health spaces because that is what is required for something to be considered a disorder. And like we mentioned in the last episode, maladaptive daydreaming isn't an official disorder or anything, but currently researchers of maladaptive daydreaming are kind of conceptualizing it and treating it as such. And they've made a proposed diagnostic criteria, and they're they've found things that they think really point to it being its own disorder. We'll see how that pans out for them, but I'm going to try to treat it the same way that the people researching it are. And they are using language and definitions that are in step with the DSM. I think I have a video on maladaptive daydreaming and the DSM. It's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. That's what it's called, right? I'm having doubts now. I know what it's called, but I'm doubting myself. Hold on, I'm gonna look it up. Yeah, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. I was right. Don't worry. Don't worry. I'm on point here. Anyway, so yeah, whenever in the future, in the past, whenever you're seeing me at least use the term that MD is a disorder, just kind of in your mind, just put like a proposed in parentheses right there on what the DSM says. And the requirement from something like the DSM for something to be a disorder is it has to cause distress or dysfunction to the person in their life. If you're fine with it, you're fine with it. Nobody else can tell you how to live your life. If it's not a problem for you, it's not a problem for you. There's no reason that you would have to get into the mindset of I am disordered if something, even if it's abnormal, is a positive influence on your life. Same with maladaptive daydreaming. If it's not affecting you negatively, you might want to call yourself an immersive daydreamer instead. That's up to you. I don't know your life, but maladaptive is going to imply a maladaptation. And if you don't have that, you might want a different term. Now, also, like I said in the last one, the the daydreams, they're not like intrusive thoughts, they're not distressing thoughts. The daydreams themselves are usually something that the daydreamer really likes or loves to engage in, or even if they don't actively love them, they're at least fulfilling some sort of probably emotional need that keeps the daydreamer returning to them again and again and again. The parallel that we draw is with something like drugs or alcohol or food, other types of addiction where, you know, something like heroin feels great. Getting a buzz on feels nice. Food tastes good. It's the other aspects of that relationship that are the terrible part. The physical symptoms, the mental toll that it takes, the alienation, the urges, the withdrawal, all those things are what make that object of addiction or obsession or compulsion really, really bad. That's where the distress comes from. So in maladaptive daydreaming, the distress we're going to pull from Bigelson and Shupak 2011, a paper that I will link below. This is the first paper that really kind of outlined the sources of distress and dysfunction for a maladaptive daydreamer. And they split it into three categories: time, control, shame. For the purposes of this video, I'm adding a fourth. We're going to talk about the crash, which is essentially withdrawal. Actually wouldn't really call it withdrawal. I guess it could be. We'll get to it. So here's our first source of distress: time. Citing my source again, Bigelson Shupak 2011, down in the description. Which I want you to know because I'm about to say a bunch of statistics and I don't want you to think I'm making them up. Now, this paper, hold on, let me find it. Let me get it in front of me. I don't know why I didn't do that before. All right, so this paper that we're citing, Bigelson Shupak 2011, is called Compulsive Fantasy, with the subtitle Proposed Evidence for an Underreported Mental Disorder, Underreported Syndrome through a Systematic Study of 90 Self-Identified Non-Normative Fantasizers. Linked below. Again, want you to know what it is because I'm about to say a bunch of statistics, and this is where they come from. Not just making them up. Another thing to point out about this paper is it doesn't use the word maladaptive daydreaming. It says non-normative fantasizers. At this point, they were kind of thinking maladaptive daydreaming was a weird name, and they actually wanted to rename it to compulsive fantasy. That didn't take. We're still called maladaptive daydreaming. It's called daydreaming disorder, parentheses, maladaptive daydreaming. But for a hot second, they were considering compulsive fantasy because they thought that was more descriptive. Point is, I'm not certain that all of the people being described in this would describe themselves as maladaptive daydreamers. So eh, I think these numbers have some wiggle room. Okay, now what they found is about 60% of the population that they were studying said that they feel remorse, I believe is the term used, remorse over not attending to things in their real life because they're spending so much time in their fantasy. They're saying in this paper, the sample that they're studying is saying that they're spending, again, almost, well, about 56% of their time in active, elaborate, maladaptive daydream. Um, I don't know why I did that because they don't say that in the paper. This sample that they're studying is saying that they're spending about 50% of their time in active, elaborate fantasizing. So this isn't mind wandering. It's not, to do lists or what if I said this to my boss or that barista is hot. It's not the idle thoughts that come in and out while you're washing the dishes or whatever. This is active fantasy building. And this led to about a quarter of the sample feeling truly socially impaired. They said that they believe that they are perceived as completely normal by an outside observer, but that outside observer sort of can't see the balancing act that they're doing, doesn't see all the time that they're away from the world. And even when they are seen by others, they might not actually be there. Very sad, like 9 or 10% of this sample said they don't have any friends. They don't have any meaningful relationships. And even the ones who didn't report that kind of severity, the ones who said they had normal lives, they still said that they preferred to spend their time in the fantasy world and they would put off other things or they would do this mentally exhausting balancing act to make it all work out because they needed it. They needed the time to daydream, and it threw their whole life out of whack. That's about all I have to say about time. Leave any questions below, by the way. I don't know if I can answer them, but I'll try. All right. And our next section, control. I was so pleased. Now, like I said before, maladaptive daydreamers do tend to enjoy their daydreamings. They get something out of it, but they still get upset over that loss of control. They can't control when things are really going to start, how long they're going to stay in it. And that doesn't mean that they're always just happening. Yes, they are a lot of the time sort of just happening. You sort of train your brain to go into that fantasy whenever you're not, actively engaged in something else. That will happen anyway. It's called the default mode network. You can look that up. Mind watering is sort of the default of your brain. It doesn't just shut off and go blank when you're not actively thinking about something, it wanders. It's completely normal. So you are already just by being human prone to your mind wandering when you're not engaged in something else. And maladaptive daydreamers will sort of train their brain to not just wander idly, but to go into one of their fantasies. So it will just happen. And once you're in it, because it's so absorptive, it can be hard to get out. So you can't really control when you come out of it either all the time. And even if you do, you might, get the withdrawal type symptoms, the urges and stuff to continue or to get back to it. And that is another part of the control because sometimes it doesn't just turn on. Like sometimes a maladaptive daydreamer will purposefully go into a daydream. They controlled that. They made the decision that they were going to do that. But the problem is that they can't really control the urge to create the fantasy or the need to go into it. You might think of like a smoker who they know the consequences, they know that it's bad for them. They may even want to quit, but they still make that active choice to find their lighter, put on their coat, go outside to the porch, and light their cigarette. Like they controlled that action, but they couldn't control themselves, the urge. Now, that's smoking's different, it's that's a physical addiction to nicotine, but just to kind of to give you an idea of what I mean by they can't control their urge. This paper found that quarter about of the people that they interviewed actually used parallels to addiction. And I think this is maybe where the idea that MD is a behavioral addiction started to form. That didn't come out of nowhere. We said it. Like I mean, a lot of us in studies, when we talked to researchers and psychologists, we were using terms um, like addiction to describe what we were feeling. And they were like, oh, okay, let's look into that. And it comes complete with those withdrawal like symptoms, which I think we'll probably talk about more in a second in the crash part. And then, they also found with control that about like 80%, like a lot, most of the people said that they had tried to control their daydreaming, but they kept failing. I remember this was in 2011. This was before MD was really known. So I hope that this number has gone down in the years that maladaptive daydreaming has been known and more studied and more awareness and more information about it has, been put out there on the internet. But back then when these people were being interviewed, uh, nobody knew what maladaptive daydreaming was. Nobody knew the language that um, they needed to use to describe themselves accurately. If they went to a therapist, like they weren't sure what to say. It was hard for them to be understood, and there was no understanding of where it was coming from or what it was. So there was definitely no understanding of the things that you could do to address or treat it. Um, so yeah, that's a really huge number of people who tried and just kept failing, and that led to a lot of distress when they actively tried and they failed and they just realized how absolutely out of control it was. They got scared. That is a scary, distressing thing to learn and makes one ashamed. Shame was the third major contributing factor that this paper found. This paper found that most maladaptive daydreamers, or what was it, like non-normative fantasizers, went out of their way to hide their daydreaming. And I think this has been backed up in other papers. I'm not going to go look. You can if you want. I'll link the ICMDR down below. But they go out of their way to hide it. They don't know. MDers don't typically talk about their maladaptive daydreaming in real life. The internet can give the false impression that we are really vocal about our fantasies, but that's through the anonymity of the internet. In real life, we haven't historically tended to talk about it with other people. I hope that's changing. As people, have a language to describe themselves with, they can maybe talk to therapists about it in a more effective way, and not be scared to bring it up because they don't know how to explain it. And hopefully, with just mental health awareness in general, with society changing to look more kindly on that, hopefully people will be able to be more open about everything. I mean, not just this, but hopefully nobody in the future will have to be scared of coming out to their family about mental health issues. But it is what it is right now. It may be changing, but at least when this was done in 2011, which wasn't that long ago, people were scared and they would hide it and they wouldn't tell anybody about it. They were ashamed of it. They were embarrassed by it. They were afraid of what other people would think of them. And that is extremely isolating, perhaps especially as you get older and you really want to settle into long-term relationships of your own choosing, with a partner, perhaps. Maladaptive daydreaming is such, like we went over in time, like it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of mental energy, and we're deeply attached generally to our daydream worlds and characters. And that is a big part of yourself to hide from a partner. And not just from a partner, but from anyone else that you care about or want to share yourself with. It's very isolating. Shame also comes in with the invalidation, which I also hope is on the decline, but I don't know. Every once in a while, you'll still see people saying like, "Oh, I went to my therapist," and they just said, "Oh, you're creative." That creates a sense of shame as well. Like, I mean, this is the professional, and they're telling me this thing isn't a problem. So if I feel that it's a problem in me and it's not the actual problem, then there's something wrong with me. Why can't I deal with this normal thing? And then there is this other aspect to shame that, in addition to being sort of in hiding about it or embarrassed by it, in addition to sort of feeling a little crazy about it when other people are like, what are you talking about? That's not a big deal. There's also that we do love it. And it's often idolized, idealized, idea. The hard, that word is so hard to say without making it sound like idol, like anyway. These worlds are often idealized, and a lot of maladaptive daydreamers, not all, but a lot, will form strong bonds to their characters. Obviously, these aren't real world bonds, but they're emotional bonds, and emotions are real. So it's real to you, real enough anyway. You're having a real, actual emotional reaction to it. And that can upset your real life when reality just isn't like that. In your daydreams, you can have a very deep and meaningful bond with your best friend. And in real life, your best friend is kind of a douche that you don't even really like that much. There's a very large disconnect between what friendship is or what friendship you have and what friendship should be and what you should be aspiring to. And why can't you have something like that in reality? And then, why am I expecting my best friend to be like some ideal character that I made up? That's not fair to them. They're a real person with their own wants and needs and inner world. And you can't expect someone else to live to a standard of perfection that you set in your fantasies. So you feel ashamed for comparing the two as well. Why can't I love people, real people, the way that I love character? Why can't I form a close bond with a real human being? I have to do it with Hermione Granger, Why can't I form a deep and meaningful bond with another person? What's wrong with me? That kind of shame. So so the last one we're going to go over is the crash. We're just going to touch on that real quick. But I also want to bring up like these are just like the three big ones that came up in this paper. There are other things that are, considered part of dysfunction or distress. People have trouble sleeping, for example. They have physical issues, pacers and stuff, blowing their knees out or breaking their ankles or whatever pacers do. Tinnitus. Um, so I don't want you to think these are the only places distress and dysfunction come from. They're just the big ones that we're going over. Anyway, last one, crash. Very common thing for maladaptive daydreamers to go through. It's basically the term we use to describe sort of the afterglow of maladaptive daydreaming, but it's not really a glow. It's more of a seeping malignant ooze. Now, it's going to vary from individual to individual, but it's negative feelings that come up when you're not daydreaming, especially after like a big binge or something. So it may be shame, like we just talked about before. Why did I put off all this stuff that I was supposed to do? I'm a bad friend. I'm a bad person. I'm, lazy and horrible, and I should have been doing this, but I sunk all my time into daydreaming. I'm totally out of control. Throwback to bring in our other topics. And, like in the shame section before, there's also that disconnect between the fantasy where you can experience really deep emotions with things that you're connected to and then coming back to reality and not feeling that, feeling actually really disconnected from where you are, feeling like you don't belong here. It's just gross, it's dull, it's awful, and there's not even anything you can do about it. So it's just a miserable experience to even, be awake. The symptoms can be physical. They can cause you anxiety or depression or, something like that. You will often also feel the urge to return to your daydream quickly, probably to ease those negative feelings. So you sort of get caught in this negative feedback loop where you feel bad, so you daydream, and then y- you feel bad because you're daydreaming, so you stop daydreaming, but then you feel really bad, so you go back to daydreaming, and it just sort of cycles through. Ugh. It's a spiral that's kind of hard to break out of. But it is really worth it because what I want to say really with the crash is that no matter how you're experiencing it, it is temporary. You can get through those negative feelings and you can start to work on your reality. Once you get back to reality, it's not actually as miserable. You just need to reacclimate to it because the like here, we're going to draw a graph. So right, so you start out maybe here, and then we're daydreaming and we feel really, really good. And then we're like, oh wait, maybe I should like stop daydreaming. That's the crash. But then, you know, you'll come up out of that. You just gotta get through it. And then you'll notice, oh, okay, reality's actually all right. I feel like a real professor. I have a whiteboard and everything. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this episode of MD 101 Distress and Dysfunction. Those are the major places that distress and dysfunction can come from. There are, like I said, a lot of other sources for this. A lot of other things that are gonna pop up, but these are the big main ones, and they're definitely the ones that you can um, go read about in the thing down below the paper, Pulse of Fantasy. I encourage you to read a lot of the papers on the ICMDR, also linked below. They're going to back up and elaborate on a lot of this stuff that we just went over. This is part 3 where we're going to go over content. I was going to wear my fun hat today, but I couldn't find it. So we have a fun hairpin instead, which is a colored pencil. What? Sorry about that. So content doesn't matter. Said that a lot on this channel. It's not entirely accurate. Yeah, the content, it might mean something to you or reflect something about you. But in general, when you're talking about a diagnosis of maladaptive daydreaming, content doesn't really matter to that. The You will not find any questions or statements about what maladaptive daydreamers daydream about in the symptom domain or on the maladaptive daydreaming scale. Because it doesn't matter if you're Harry Potter, it doesn't matter if you're an idealized self, it doesn't matter if you're not in your daydreams at all, it doesn't matter if you daydream a massive, detailed paracosm, it doesn't matter if you daydream the same scene over and over and over again. The contents of our daydreams are as varied as the individual. With that said, there are some differences in common themes. Now, a lot of the I lost my whiteboard pen. Hang on. Found it. It was upstairs on my kitchen table. I went up there to take the phone call and I had it in my hand. Anyway, um, what were we talking about? Right. I shouldn't record with my phone around. A lot of what makes maladaptive or immersive daydreams different from normal daydreams is more the nature of them. They're deeper, whereas normal daydreams are a lot more fleeting. They also tend to be more rooted in reality, whereas maladaptive daydreams tend to be more fantastical. Oh, don't run out. So we're not going to dwell too much on the differences. That's basically it. If you're a maladaptive daydreamer, you likely have normal daydreams anyway. Many report that they have both. So we're just going to go right into common themes for maladaptive daydreamers. So again, I'm going to be saying a bunch of numbers that I don't want you to think I'm just making up. So all of this is coming from Bickelson, Lehrfeld, Jopp, and Sommer. I forget Sommer. 2016 evidence for an underreported mental illness. Maladaptive daydreaming, evidence for an under-researched mental health disorder. Whoa, that was rough. So go ahead and guess what the most common theme among maladaptive daydreamers is. The most common reported one, anyway. This paper asked maladaptive daydreamers to sort of categorize their main theme. So keep that in mind. This is just sort of the umbrella that the maladaptive daydreamers interviewed are throwing their main theme under. But if we include a secondary and tertiary themes, these numbers might change. Why, no, it is not inserting yourself into fictional worlds. It's actually celebrity. Being a celebrity, hanging with a celebrity, being the romantic interest of a celebrity. Celebrity. 37% of the sample of maladaptive daydreamers said that that was, sort of the umbrella term that their main theme would fall under. 4% of normal daydreamers said that. 4. Just to round out the top 3, the next 2 were a tie, actually. It was romantic or sexual relationships and daydreaming about an idealized self. Those were both at 34% for maladaptive daydreamers. For normal daydreamers, if you're interested in the comparison, the idealized self, again, was only sitting at 4%, but the romantic one jumps all the way to 14%. The most common daydreams for normal daydreamers was actually wish fulfillment and real life scenarios, having conversations with people at work and things like that at 34 and 39%. So just for comparison. So, I mean, yeah, I do say that the contents don't matter. I say that a lot. They don't matter to a diagnosis of maladaptive daydreaming, but there are differences, quantifiable differences. Another thing, just before we move on, while we're still on contents, is the persistence. Well, when we were talking about the definition of MD, a thing that came up was that it's recurrent. It's chronic. It's a thing that keeps coming back and back and back. I just wanted to mention that that doesn't always mean the same daydream is coming back and back and back. There are people who will stay in one single daydream or paracosm or world, whatever you want to call it, for years, maybe the entirety of their lives. There are other people who will swap them out very rapidly. There are people who won't daydream the same thing twice in a row. Once that plot is finished, they move on to the next plot, the next set of characters in some totally different setting. Again, just like what the actual content is, what the theme is, it's as varied as the individual, and it doesn't mean that something is or is not maladaptive daydreaming. You're gonna have to look for your clues elsewhere. That leads us nicely into experience, how you experience the daydreams. Because this comes up a lot. People ask, if I don't daydream about a massive detailed paracosm, am I still a maladaptive daydreamer? Like I just said, I probably should have waited until we were here to say it, but I already said it. Yes, you might be. It doesn't tell you if you're a maladaptive daydreamer or not. Neither does the main theme of your daydream, although obviously we can see that there are certain themes which are a lot more likely among maladaptive daydreamers. But even wish fulfillment and what was the other one? Real life scenarios. Those were the two biggest ones for normal daydreamers. But it's not like no maladaptive daydreamers reported that. A bunch did, 6 and 7% respectively. So it's a little less common among us, but it's not like it doesn't happen. Also, what people wonder is first, third person, things like that. I'm not in my daydreams. Doesn't matter. Some people just daydream as like the non-existent, omniscient third person narrator, or they're not even the narrator. They're just watching it unfold. While some people are the main character of their own daydreams, and some people are the main character, but it's not actually them. They're actually a completely different character, but it's kind of like their self insert. Again, just a stylistic choice, doesn't really matter. Back to narration, because this is a big one. A lot of people wonder about the visual element of maladaptive daydreaming. When you talk to maladaptive daydreamers, the majority of us are seeing people. We have typical eyesight. And daydreams in general often have a very strong visual element among anyone who has typical eyesight, anyway. So, the most common report you'll see is people talking about what they're seeing in their daydreams, in their mind's eye, and how detailed it might be, or how detailed it is. You'll see people say like, "Oh, I can't actually see their faces. Their faces are kind of blurry," um, which I think is weird. Like, are their faces blurry in your daydreams? "Oh, no, mine are super detailed. I can see every line." You know, it's a lot of talk about what you can see, but that is not the only way to experience daydreams. Like I just said, like somebody who's never experienced sight, someone who's blind from birth, you think they just don't daydream? Of course they daydream. They just don't do it with visual elements, or at least not visual elements in the sense that a sighted person would understand them. Some people with perfect eyesight have what's called aphantasia, where they don't really see images in their mind's eye, and they will experience daydreams without a visual element. And some people do this narration thing where they may or may not be able to daydream with visual elements, but it doesn't matter because it's not really the focus of their daydream. The focus of their daydream is an ongoing narration, like their inner voice, saying words. And none of these matter to whether or not what you're experiencing is or is not maladaptive daydreaming, because daydreaming is so varied and it's not always visual experience. So yes, people with aphantasia can be maladaptive daydreamers. People who are narrating instead of seeing things could be maladaptive daydreamers. What matters to the experience is that however you are daydreaming and whatever you are daydreaming about, it is absorptive. You are immersed in it. It has some sense of vividness or lucidity or affect. You're there, you're taken with it, and it takes you. That's the main thing. That is the thing that you are going to see listed on like the diagnostic criteria. They don't care about your characters. They don't care about your main theme. You might That might be fun to talk about in therapy to, really get to the nitty-gritty of what might be the root cause of your daydreaming, but it's not going to tell you if that daydreaming is of the immersive or maladaptive variety. Was another paper about personality traits in maladaptive daydreaming that actually talked about that a little bit. They looked at some key personality types and then looked at the main theme of their daydreaming and to see if there was any pattern there. And they did find one. Individuals who had a sense of grandiosity about them. Their daydreams were more focused on wish fulfillment. People with the separation insecurity, I think they called it separation, separation anxious. I'll link the paper below. You can look it up yourself. But they daydreamed about relationships, fulfilling relationships mostly. Uh, there's some other papers that touch on contents of daydreams. I'll try to find them all and link them all below for you. But uh, this is just 101. so so we're not gonna cover all of them. Last one we're gonna cover is negative daydreams, because I think this one gets a little bit misunderstood. Negative daydreams are very common among maladaptive daydreamers. Um, well, negative themes in daydreams anyway. Death, violence, revenge. Uh, Almost 20% of maladaptive daydreamers report these as their main themes. Once you get into secondary and tertiary, I bet a lot of those other people are going to fall into like this is a major theme, not the main theme, at least a major theme of my daydreams. Don't have a number on that, but come on. It's super common is the point. And these daydreams can be absolutely horrible. But they are filled with, I mean, trigger warning, I'm about to say a bunch of words. They're filled with assault, sexual assault, abuse, child abuse, torture, neglect, war, battles and fights and gouging each other's eyes out, like really nasty stuff, not just of the physical kind. These can also be uh, deeply emotional, characters playing mind games with each other, mentally and emotionally torturing one another, their peers, their children, their enemies. Sometimes you or the character who represents you in your daydreams will be the perpetrator, sometimes the victim. Um, Sometimes, if you're a third person daydreamer, you're not involved in any of the violence. It's your character on character violence, but you're the mind creating it. You're the orchestrator, for lack of a better word. But here's the thing about these daydreams is we still like them. They're horrible, they're violent. You would not condone these things in real life. You're not interested in these things in real life. You would never actually torture somebody, and you don't want someone to torture you. And maybe watching your character go through this is actually bringing you to tears. You're sitting there in your bed sobbing and sobbing because of what this character is going through. But you keep going back to it because part of you really loves it. And that's not weird. That is not weird at all. The negative daydreams are not typically intrusive style daydreams. They are the paper Parallel Lives is the one that I'm mostly pulling from for this, touches on it, and they call it hedonic reversal. And it is sort of the same mental mechanism. I am sorry for that sound in the background, by the way. I'm in my basement. There's nothing I can do about it. Anyway, it's the same mechanism that lets you love horror movies. I love horror movies. It's the same mechanism that lets you like enjoy roller coasters and spicy food. It's weird. It's all like wrapped up in the same thing. Um, because it's your mind. You're actually really safe from all these things that are happening, mentally and emotionally too. Like they might be difficult to watch. You're sitting up all night crying, but you're not actually going to traumatize yourself from these. Your own mind doesn't do that to you. And a lot of people don't really talk about the violent ones, and I can understand why. Like, I mean, why would you, why would you bring that up? So yeah, you might not see this topic get brought up as much as other themes and plot lines of a maladaptive daydreamer's fantasies, but it is really common, and does not. It doesn't really mean anything about the daydreamer. I'm sure it does. If you want to go to therapy, like it might mean something. Maybe you're processing your own trauma. Maybe it's a revenge type fantasy. Maybe it's a power type fantasy. Maybe if you're the victim, it's a vulnerability type thing. You need to experience that through your fantasies, or want to be saved from something, or who knows? Who knows? You can talk about that in therapy. The point is, it's much more likely that the reason for it is something like that, rather than the reason being, oh, I'm actually really into this and I'm a violent person. You're really not likely to be a very violent person, at least not any more than is typical. There is also another sort of type of violent daydreams that I don't have anything to back me up on this. I just know that it happens to me and I know that it happens to other maladaptive daydreamers. I call them intrusive daydreams because I don't have anything else to call them. But just to touch on that, my theory is that if a maladaptive daydreamer gets like an intrusive thought, because they are already really good at daydreaming, that intrusive thought can turn into a more drawn out, actually distressing daydream. Not a hedonic reversal daydream, an actually distressing one. Those may pop up in maladaptive daydreamers from time to time, especially in people that might be prone to intrusive style thinking. But that is not what typical maladaptive daydreams look like. And if that is the only way you experience your daydreams, you're probably not dealing with maladaptive daydreaming. You might be dealing with, actually, I'm not qualified to speak on what you might be dealing with. Talk to somebody about it, is where we're leaving it for today. The next section is signs and symptoms. MD 101. My little, oh no, I think it's running out of ink. Signs and symptoms. So if you look up maladaptive daydreaming signs and symptoms on the internet, you're going to find a few different lists. Some include some things and some don't include those things and they include other things. We are going to be basing our signs and symptoms off of the maladaptive daydreaming scale, the MDS-16. The MDS-16 is a 16 question list of experiences common in maladaptive daydreamers. And it's a Likert scale, which is, rate how strongly you feel this on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being, you know, least strongly or not at all, and 10 being very severely or a lot. It's you've seen them before. So you fill out that little questionnaire, or a mental health professional will walk you through it, and you kind of rate where you fall on all the different things. And some of them will be 0, and some of them will be 10, and some of them will be like, I don't know, 8, 5, 2. Yeah, add up all your scores at the end or whatever, and then, you talk to your therapist about it. So it's not an exhaustive list of what a maladaptive daydreamer might experience, but it does hit the bigger notes, and that's why we're going to use it to cultivate our list of signs and symptoms. Also, drawing a little bit from the proposed diagnostic criteria, proposed because maladaptive daydreaming has not been proven to be its own unique disorder, but it does have a diagnostic criteria that the researchers made while they were conceptualizing what MD is, and how you would distinguish a maladaptive daydreamer from just an immersive daydreamer. And I will link both of these down below. Important to remember, just a note, these are not self-diagnosis tools. These are tools that are meant to be used. Um, they were made for mental health professionals to use in their practice to help them with their clients. Patients? I don't know what word is better. You can take them. You can take the quiz yourself. But the scale. You can do the scale yourself and get an idea of where you fall. Just remember, that you're biased to your own experiences, and the scale just it wasn't made with that purpose in mind. It can give you an idea of where your problem areas lie, an idea of how much you might be lining up with maladaptive daydreaming experiences, but it can't tell you that you are or aren't a maladaptive daydreamer. You're going to want to take the totality of your experience, not just this score, to figure things out for yourself, to self analyze. Both be below, along with their papers that explain how they were made and why they were made, and have all the numbers and statistics along with them that I don't understand. I'm not even going to pretend to understand, but it all looks very impressive. So there's that. First up, immersion. We've talked about immersion in a couple of the previous episodes, but just to reiterate, when researchers started talking to self identified maladaptive daydreamers, a lot of what they were hearing was virtually everyone told them that this behavior began in childhood, very often early childhood. It is not uncommon, to see people say things like, I've done this my entire life. I've been doing it since the age of 3. I've done it for as long as I can remember, and things to that effect. And they're not exaggerating. My earliest memory of maladaptive daydreaming is around the age of 5. And I know it's around the age of 5 because we moved a lot, and I remember which house I was in when it happened. So I can definitely pinpoint it wasn't after the age of 5 because we don't live there anymore. And it's hard to remember things from before that age, like just the way the brain works, the memory doesn't solidify in that way. You don't have more than like 1 or 2 memories from very early childhood. That's not particularly normal. There are some people who have better memories of that far back, but that's a lot more rare. So maybe I did do it before the age of 5 and just have no memory of it. Other people, if they had parents who were paying attention and noted behavior, will tell them that, oh, you have paced like that almost ever since you could walk. And they kind of put 2 and 2 together, that pacing behavior, which has always been associated with their daydreaming. They were probably also fantasizing, even though they can't remember it, while they were doing that behavior as a young child. Not everybody starts that early. Some people don't report it starting till like 9, 12, 15, things like that. Usually not in adulthood, but adolescence and down. Anyway, to get back to the point, I went off on a tangent there. That got the researchers to thinking, like, is this something that people are born with? And they've sort of landed on the idea that yes, it probably is. Some people are born with the ability to daydream very deeply, to fantasize with vividness and lucidity and detail for long stretches of time, to just be really, really immersed in it. It's called dissociative absorption, and everybody does it. Dissociative absorption is when you're absorbed in something. It's that moment when you're really into a book and, the action is unfolding in your mind's eye and you're not particularly aware of yourself or your surroundings. You're just really into what you're reading. Or, it happens with films. It happens with all forms of daydreaming, really, or dissociative absorption. It's a totally normal function of the human mind that happens to everybody, but maladaptive daydreamers and immersive daydreamers, among other people, but here we're talking about MD, they're just more prone to it and they're naturally really good at it. So to be a maladaptive daydreamer, you have to have this trait. Whether or not that trait can be developed later in life, if it's something you can learn how to do, or something that can be triggered into existence through some sort of catalyst, not sure, up in the air. But but in general, the thinking is that most of us are probably just born good at it, and that's what makes us immersive daydreamers. And then later, something happens. There's lots of pathways to developing MD, but that immersive daydreaming will develop into um, a maladaptation under some circumstances for whatever reason. So on the diagnostic criteria and on the maladaptive daydreaming scale, you'll see that that's right at the top. That's you know an important feature, not just an important feature. That is a prerequisite to even being considered that you might be a maladaptive daydreamer. And like we talked about in the last section, I believe, it is not always a visual experience. It's not that you're seeing a lot of detail. Many of us, I would say most of us, do see with a lot of detail. We do have a strong visual element to our daydreaming, but daydreaming isn't always visual. So that immersion and that absorptive nature can come from other places. It's not just that, you are really good at visualizing. The absorption could be coming from some other form of daydreaming, from narrating or through feeling or something, or whatever. But yeah, immersion, that's the first sign you're a maladaptive daydreamer. That's one of the biggest ones. The rest of these are not universal. You might show some of them, you might not. Immersive daydreaming and sort of the persistence that MD has, the distress and dysfunction that we already talked about. Those are the two that are universal. The rest of these you may or may not experience. Music. Maladaptive daydreaming has a strong relationship to music in most maladaptive daydreams. So the daydreams could be triggered by music. That's a really strong one for me. If I hear music, I'm going to start daydreaming, even if it's just ambient music in like the grocery store. It could be maintained by music. When you're listening to music, you will daydream longer than if you are not listening to music. There's an element to the soundtrack that just lets you go longer, lets you, block out the external world a bit better. And so you can go on these big binges. And I remember, just from my personal experience, having my headphones on for hours and hours and hours all night. I would sleep in my headphones. I did some damage to my ears. Got to watch out for that. Or they could be enhanced by music. So you can daydream without music. It's just better when there is music. It enhances it, somehow. But like, why music? And there's some ideas on why music is such this big thing for maladaptive daydreamers. And it sort of starts with it's a good tool to block out external stimuli. You can really get in to music and stuff, and you're not really hearing what's going on around you. You're not really focusing on what's going around you. It's an entry point into absorption. It makes the absorption easier to maintain. And it makes it easier to maintain because music is not a one-dimensional kind of thing. Music itself has a lot of facets to it. Um, Beat and tempo and melody, lyrics themselves, singers, or even if there's no lyrics, even if it's just the music itself, is emotive. You can feel it, and every single one of those things is just a little gateway for a maladaptive daydreamer to get into. So it's very appealing. It's very strong at what it does, whether it's triggering, maintaining, or enhancing. It does it very well. There are some maladaptive daydreamers who don't use music, and there are some maladaptive daydreamers who actually find the opposite. They find that music disrupts their daydreams, and they can't really daydream with music playing because it distracts them. That does happen, um, but they're more rare. They're more rare in general. The stereotype of the maladaptive daydreamer, I guess, would be that they constantly need their music. Like give an MD or panic attack, hide their headphones. Don't do that. It's mean. Movement. It's actually pretty similar to the music. It triggers, enhances, or maintains. So this is a repetitive movement. The most common one is pacing. But it can actually be any kind of repetitive movement. There's, swingers and jumpers and spinners and tossers and wigglers and foot bouncers. Whatever it is, it's repetitive. You got to watch out for this one because it can give you some physical issues. We don't want pacers ruining their knees, you know, or like hand movement people and get arthritis in your wrist or something. Because when somebody daydreams like this, I mean, if your maladaptive daydreaming is severe enough, it won't just be a few minutes every day. It'll be these stretches of time, long periods of time where you're just doing the same thing over and over and over. And just like if you're a working data entry or something, you're just typing all day. You got to watch out for carpal tunnel. People who have movements, just be aware. Be aware. It's you can choose. But why? Why do we pace or rock or whatever? Because it facilitates absorption. It's a way to kind of to block out external stimuli. When you have your body engaged in something like this, you're not really taking in, you're dulling the things around you, so it's easier to get internally absorbed. And it's not completely absent. Like your mind is not completely absent. If you're a pacer and you're walking around, you can walk around a chair. You're not going to just walk into it. There's still a level of awareness right there on the edge of your consciousness, but you might not, hear someone calling your name or something. And the researchers actually explained it in one of the papers. I can't remember which one, but they were like, think about shaman. Shaman often enter trance over a variety of different cultures through the use of movement and music. They'll dance themselves into trance to the sound of a drum beat. And that's basically what the researchers think is happening when maladaptive daydreamers employ this really powerful music movement combo. Is they're putting themselves into, I don't I don't want to say a trance, but kind of like a trance and into a semi-trance like state where they can really double down on being absorbed internally. And because maladaptive daydreaming starts so young in a lot of us, people don't really know why they're pacing. It's just something, from your perspective that you've always done, but you can never really pinpoint the reason, and it's because you just sort of accidentally discovered it in early childhood. It's just so long ago that you forgot the first time you noticed it, or maybe you didn't even notice it. It's just one of those things you kind of stumble across and forget the origin of. There's actually two kinds of movement in maladaptive daydreaming. So the first one was repetitive movements, and the second one is sympathetic movements. Sympathetic movements are you reacting to what is going on in your head, like physically. So this is where the actors would fall. There are maladaptive daydreamers who, instead of having like this pacing or rocking or swinging action, will actually act out their daydreams, say all the words out loud, and make all the gestures that they are making in the daydream. And maybe they'll make the gestures of their other characters. I'm not really sure. I hope there's an actor out there. If there's an actor out there, put it in like the comments. Do they act out all the other characters too, or just their self character? I'm going to guess that it's split. I'm going to guess some just act out their parts and others act out all of the parts. Probably should have looked that up before I did this video, but Whatever, that's why we have a community. Somebody will let me know. But it doesn't always take the form of like full on acting out scenes and stuff. More often, it's actually just like making weird faces, like smiling to yourself because something funny is happening, giggling a little, making a grossed out face, like if something gross is happening, crying. People will cry because of their daydreams, because you are crying in your daydream or because you're crying sympathetically with a character or even just because the emotion of the scene moved you to tears. And it can also be, like trigger vocal noises like whispering and stuff. Like you might sort of under your breath whisper like a line or move your mouth like you're saying something that the characters are saying. You'll just be like, I do that. I'm a whisperer. I'm a whisperer. Just phrases, just out. I don't whisper the whole thing, but every once in a while you know, your mind's completely absorbed in this little alternate reality. And the brain is the brain and it's gonna do brain things. So if you're thinking really hard about throwing a rock at somebody, your arm might twitch. Daydream when you're bored. People daydream during a lot of emotions and things. But I guess this particular one, it's not just bored. It actually I should have wrote it down. It comes with when distressed or bored. There we go. Um, so here, yeah, the maladaptive daydreamer is using their daydreams as a sort of self-soothing kind of thing. And we've kind of set our brains that like these fantasies are our go-to. So if you're feeling listless or something, your I guess sort of natural reaction would be to fall back on your fantasy habit. And solitude. It's harder to daydream with other people around. They want things from you. They make judgments on you. They distract you. Like daydreaming's a lot better alone. It just is. So daydreams will intensify when you're alone. And this can actually spiral into a self-imposed isolation. You crave the solitude, you want to get away from people to daydream, and that just puts distance between you and other people. And then you feel bad that like everybody's going out except me. I'm home alone, bored, maybe a bit distressed because I'm being left behind. So you daydream more. You fill that time with your daydreaming, which puts more distance between you and other people until all your social networks have crumbled around you. And this doesn't mean that you can't daydream in the presence of others. I daydream in front of other people all the time. I can daydream while somebody's actively speaking to me and I am having a conversation with them. Just kind of flip on that autopilot switch. Mhm. Oh, yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Hmm. But you can't go as deep or as long when, somebody's like right there. Maladaptive daydreamers get annoyed when they're interrupted. Annoyed is a gentle way of putting it. I guess some people probably only get a bit annoyed. Some people get angry, really irritated. And this speaks to the power that these daydreams have over us, the investment that we put into them, and the connection that we have to them, and also the feeling that we get from them. It's a good feeling coming into reality. Whether you're crashing or not, even if it's not a full blown daydream crash, like you're still like, it's a stark difference. And if you happen to not be a maladaptive daydreamer, just think of it like this: like you're watching your favorite show, right? Game of Thrones is on tonight or whatever that new one is, the House of the Dragon, right? That's a thing people love right now. And there's a new episode on and you're watching it, and then somebody comes in and just unplugs the goddamn TV. You'd be kind of pissed. Even though it's on streaming and you can just turn it back on whenever you feel like it, you're still not going to have a very pleasant reaction to that. And now imagine you're a maladaptive daydreamer and that show is playing all the time and it is constantly being unplugged. Well, first, you might be irritated, and then you might get angry and resentful. And pulls that plug and keeps that plug, cuts it or something. I don't know. Kind of losing grasp of my metaphor here. A maladaptive daydreamer would be full on distressed if that happened. You might be pissed about being unplugged for a few minutes, but if a maladaptive daydreamer is prevented from returning to their daydreams for a fairly significant length of time, and that's going to be different for all daydreamers. For some, that may be a shorter period. For some, you can probably go a pretty long time. But eventually, those, I don't want to call it withdrawal, but basically withdrawal type symptoms, they will seep in. And people report a lot of yeah, negative feelings and emotions surrounding that. We often call this the crash. And there can be a sense of urgency to return to the daydream, but you just can't. It's like having something really important that you were supposed to do today. You know it was today. It was important, but you can't remember what it was. You forgot to write it down and you're missing something that you should be doing. Like it's that kind of buzz in your body and your mind that you need to get back to it. And some people report actual physical symptoms, headaches and things like that. And that's the kind of power these fantasies have over a maladaptive daydreamer. That is not normal for someone who just engages in regular daydreaming. They're not going to get angry because they were interrupted. They might be a little annoyed that you interrupted them, but they shouldn't be getting really angry. And even if they do get angry, if it's a one-off thing, it happens. You interrupted something really good they had going with the hot barista, but they're not going to feel that kind of urge and urgency and distress to really get back to that daydream. My laptop battery is getting kind of low. I hope I can finish this. Preference. I'm actually not confident I spelled that correctly. Maladaptive daydreamers report that they would prefer to daydream than do anything else. Attend to their academics, attend to their social networks, their friends, their family, attend to their, jobs or hobbies, anything like that. Maladaptive daydreamers tend to want to daydream, and it is engaging and fulfilling enough in their life that they would rather do it over other things. They will put their jobs, their education, and their relationships in jeopardy to daydream. I remember talking to a researcher one time. I was participating in a study on maladaptive daydreaming. There was like an interview, and he asked me, this question because he was walking me through the maladaptive daydreaming scale, and I laughed at him. I was like, "Yeah, but doesn't everybody?" And he was just like trying to be nice, but he's just like, "No, no, some people prefer to spend time with with their friends." Like, "Oh, right, yeah, I bet some people do." Oh, it was so how far I've come. That was my initial reaction was to laugh at him. I'm sorry, this particular one, like I feel like I put it way too much of my personal experience into this episode. Whatever, it's my video. Don't tell me what to do. Another thing that researchers found when they were talking to maladaptive daydreamers is that most of them, even before knowing what maladaptive daydreaming was, even before they had heard those words, had tried to stop daydreaming. They recognized in their lives that something wasn't quite right. They recognized that they wanted other things out of life, and they recognized that their daydreaming habit was getting in the way of that. So they tried to stop, and they failed. Usually, well, I guess probably all the time, since in this study they were still maladaptive daydreamers. If they weren't a maladaptive daydreamer, they wouldn't have been in the study. But yeah, maladaptive daydreamers tend to have a history of repeated attempts to stop. Not everyone, of course, and especially maybe not now where people are finding out about it much younger. Maybe early enough that they hadn't gotten to the point yet where they started making those efforts. Because there isn't, yet an official treatment protocol, Since information is kind of scattered and awareness, even among professionals, is still fairly low, even with professional support, it might take a while to find what works. There might, be some failed attempts in the beginning, and especially if you're going it alone, unless you know yourself really well and you're really dedicated and understanding the healing process. There's gonna be some false starts. There's gonna be some false starts. But this is a sign of a maladaptive daydreamer, yeah. That they've tried to stop, whether they were successful or not. They it leans back on that recognition. They're recognizing that something is in the way of what they actually want to achieve. And the last one we're going to go over is the urge on waking. This one kind of ties back to being annoyed when you're interrupted. These are both signs of addiction, really signs of, some sort of withdrawal type feeling. Um, well, I mean, the interruption is like a sign of, a withdrawal type feeling, but the urge to continue immediately upon waking, that's a sign of like addiction in the way that the withdrawal thing, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, people experience an addiction, and behavioral addiction in the case of maladaptive daydreaming, not like a substance. They have urges, throughout the day. You'll get cravings. And a super common one is to immediately have that craving upon waking. That happens to maladaptive daydreamers as well. The first thing you do in the morning when you wake up is daydream. It's usually the last thing you do before you go to sleep at night. You fall asleep to your daydreams. I definitely do it. A lot of other people do too. It's common enough to be like on the measures of what a maladaptive daydreamer is. Will happen to everyone again. Not everybody's going to have all of these signs and symptoms, but these were all the common ones. The common ones that researchers really tend to focus on when they are, weeding out the maladaptive daydreamers from the immersive daydreamers from the normal daydreamers. Uh, and immersive daydreamers will have a lot of these signs and symptoms too, just because maladaptive daydreamers are immersive daydreamers, because immersive daydreaming is a prerequisite to maladaptive daydreaming. So so remember what the important ones are, right? They're immersion and distress and dysfunction. Obviously, we're all going to have the immersion. And then, we're going to have, a little mixed bag of all these other ones. But the distress and the dysfunction, that's the one that's going to set the MDers apart. If you don't have that, if your daydreaming is a positive influence on your life, you don't have to label yourself as maladapted or disordered or addicted or anything like that. Okay, you're probably fine. You're just an immersive daydreamer. It's okay. I don't want people to think that we're just pathologizing daydreaming itself. And we're not even pathologizing excessive or absorptive daydreaming. It's just this one little part, this one little subset that experiences the distress and dysfunction. Everybody else, you're okay. Daydreaming itself is not. Not even if you're doing it a crazy amount or like crazy vividly. It might not be perfectly typical, but that doesn't mean it's disordered, okay? I really want to make that clear because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there going, I do all this. So we're going to call daydreaming a disorder now. Like, I don't know. I don't know if it's a disorder. Research will figure that out. I really don't care if it's a disorder. What I want is that when people who are experiencing a negative impact, when they want support and help, when they go to a therapist and they say, I'm having a problem, that therapist takes them seriously. That's all we want. That's all we want. Beyond that, it doesn't really matter, right? But enough people get the brush off, they get laughed at. They say, oh, that's perfectly normal. You're just creative. You just stop daydreaming, just do this other thing. And that's really hard for them. Like we just saw, maladaptive daydreamers make repeated efforts to do that. They keep failing and it just causes further distress. So, yeah, if you relate to a lot of these signs and symptoms, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're disordered. Just excessive or immersive daydreamers will also really, even typical daydreamers will relate to some of these signs and symptoms. So if it's not a problem for you, it's not a problem for you. Don't you don't have to think of it as a problem for you. But if it is, it is. I kind of trailed off there. How to deal with MD. I guess that's the next section of our little booklet. So we'll do that. Now, for this part especially, I want to reiterate I am not a mental health professional. We're going to talk about how to deal with maladaptive daydreaming anyway. Just keep in mind that this advice is coming from a fellow maladaptive daydreamer, not a clinician. Looks like we may. So you've discovered this term, maladaptive daydreaming, that describes this thing that you've been doing probably for a big chunk of your life, and you're not really sure what to do about it now. It kind of takes a minute for everything to set in. You'll be noticing connections that you never noticed before. Maybe you never noticed that the pacing and the daydreaming were connected, or that your love of music was actually deeply integrated into your fantasizing. Maybe you never noticed your tendency to isolate yourself, whatever it is. Now that you know the term and you know a little bit about it, you're going to start noticing its impact on your life in a way that you maybe hadn't noticed before. And there's no reason to freak out. Don't freak out. You've been living with this a long time. You're not dead yet. You can sit with it for a second. While you're doing that, research and document. So just look stuff up about it. Obviously, I'm a fan of the peer reviewed kind of research, but you can also just look for other people's experiences and what they're saying about it. Obviously, take everything you hear with a grain of salt and keep in mind that nobody is going to experience this in the same way, and that, all the symptoms, as we went over before, are really a mixed bag. So, one MDer can look very different from another, and it doesn't mean they aren't struggling with the same condition. There's also a fair amount of misinformation out there. So, just, if you hear something presented as a fact, check it. It might be right, it might be wrong. Like, just look it up. And a great resource for you to do that with is the ICMDR, the International Consortium for Maladaptive Daydreaming Research. They have a website that they collect links mostly to research. You look at their publications page, and you'll see just about every paper whose primary focus is maladaptive daydreaming listed there. There's quite a few at this point, like, I mean, not as many as you're going to find for something like anxiety or OCD or anything, but there's a decent amount. As soon as I sit down, everybody needs to walk above my head. What was I saying? Yeah, there's a decent amount. So, maybe just read through their abstracts first, and then dive into the ones that seem, pertinent to your experience or interesting or whatever. I don't know. I think you should read them all. I've read them all. I'm and I'm not like someone who understands statistics, or like, the ins and outs of science and research. But all the papers have, like, a discussion and a conclusion section. So even though the method section can be a bit dense, to read through, skip ahead. At least for now, you can skip ahead. It's okay. It's okay to just read the conclusion and see the whole thing summed up. While you're doing this, just write your thoughts down. Diary, notebook, app, whatever. It doesn't matter. Even if you're not writing it down, just make like a mental note. Like, oh, that's connected. Oh, I noticed this. There's a lot of pathways to MD, and so there are a lot of ways of approaching it. So we're just going to go through some of the common advice that the ICMDR gives for addressing your maladaptive daydreaming. And again, this is common advice that should work for most maladaptive daydreamers. If you want something tailored specifically to you, you need to talk to your clinician. All we can do here is kind of give the broad strokes. So the first piece of advice is identify your triggers. Don't worry, we're not talking about doing anything with them yet, just identify them. So the biggest ones are music and movement. We talked about those in a previous video. I can't remember which one, but they're super, super common. And like we talked about in whichever video that was, I'm sorry, I can't remember. Music can act to trigger, maintain, or enhance. So that's one you can probably pretty easily identify right off the bat without even trying. And then, you can look at it a little closer and see, like, what is its main function? Is its main function as a trigger, maintainer, or an enhancer? Lots of things can be triggers. Not just physical or external things. They can be internal too, bad thoughts. Maybe you use your maladaptive daydreaming to push away bad thoughts. Maybe you use it to ease boredom. Maybe you use it to self-soothe as just a general catch-all coping skill for whatever is going on in your life, or maybe it's for something specific related to a specific event. About 25% of us have a history of trauma. Could be related to that. Just sort of look or notice what's going on with it. And I can hear you. I can hear you saying, but Dimmer, I don't have any triggers. Everything's a trigger. I just do it all the time. Totally get you. Me too. So with a maladaptive daydreamer like that, where it's just going all the time, you can still kind of do this step. You can pick out the ones that are particularly strong, particularly strong. There'll be a couple that rise to the surface as like stronger ones. Or you can do it backwards. Don't mind where see what triggers you to be engaged in the world. In fact, I would recommend that for the first people too. Go ahead and see what triggers you to good productive things that you want to continue doing. But especially for the I don't have any triggers crew, it's okay to work backwards. See what takes you out of it and work from there. And right now you're still just in the information gathering phase. You don't have to do anything about any of these triggers. Just notice them. Underlying issues. So yes, we are talking about comorbid disorders here, but also anything else. Just things that could be fueling the maladaptive daydreaming. If you notice that your main trigger, for example, is stress, what's driving that stress? Yes, you could have an anxiety disorder, or maybe you just live a high stress life for some reason, or maybe that's just the current trigger. Maybe you're not usually a stressed out person, but now you are, and you need something to counterbalance that, and the daydreaming took over. And that goes for anything. If you notice that boredom is your trigger, is that because you're understimulated because of the circumstances surrounding you, or because you have ADHD? Do you daydream because you're lonely? And is that loneliness because of a social anxiety or because of your circumstance? You see where I'm going with this? Like, no matter what is underlying it, you're going to want to pick that apart a little bit too. So one of the advices that I personally give people, and I've seen other people say it too. The only one really relevant to this would be Ellie Somer. I saw Ellie Somer talking about this in a video of his. Is to stop daydreaming, just for a minute. Don't freak out. Don't freak out. Just for a minute, or any set length of time. Give yourself a day. Okay, I'm not going to daydream today, and pay attention to your body and what happens during that time. You don't need to last the entire day, or 3 days or week, or however long you set aside for yourself. Point of this little experiment is to fail. But in that time, you need to pay attention to your body and to your feelings and what is happening while you're not daydreaming. What surfaces? Do you feel depressed? Do you feel anxious? Take note of how strong maybe the cravings are, and how strong the triggers are. Like how much effort do you need to put into resisting a trigger that pops up during this time? And they're all just little clues, clues. Gather them all up, jot them down, make a mental note, whatever you need to do. Just gather information. Track it. Mentioned it a few times in this video, to jot it down, to make mental notes, do whatever to keep track of all this new information that's coming in. I don't know about you, but I have a shit memory, so making mental notes isn't going to work for me. I need to write it down somewhere. And it doesn't matter where. There are journals and things that you can get online. You don't need them, all kinds of habit trackers and things. I'm actually going to do another video about those. But all you really need, is a sheet of paper. So that's simple. You can even go simpler than that. Chop feelings right off there if you want, whatever. Just oh, hard to see. Is it hard to see? Anyway, the point is you don't need to buy anything. You don't need to do anything. Find the back of a bill you don't intend to pay or something, just something to write on it, and just like 7 a.m. I woke up and daydreamed for like 2 hours. Um, the trigger was waking. I just do it when I wake up. Feelings, I'm sleepy, just whatever you have found that you want to track for you. And other things, you might want to take note of the circumstances surrounding you, your overall mood, if you had any physical pain or anything like that. um, Track if you had movements, repetitive movements, if you're someone who moves. Anything that you are wanting to track, but just get the basics down. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. And when you've taken a little bit of time to just stop and look at what you're doing, you're not no judgment, no like I need to cure this, you're not even addressing it yet, you're not thinking about it, you're just noticing it. After you've taken a moment to do that, you can start to think about what you want to do with it. So just decide. And you can change your mind. It's not one decision and stick to it. You can definitely change your mind about this. But you've learned about MD, you've researched it a little bit, you've sat with your symptoms and kind of looked at them. Is it a problem? I don't know. It might not be, in which case you can just kind of not bother anymore. I mean, you know that maladaptive daydreaming is a thing that exists now. You know it might be something you need to face in the future. If you notice that you start to have some problematic behaviors with it, you can nip it in the bud. But if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. You don't have to be labeling yourself as disordered or addicted or as a maladaptive daydreamer. You just you be an immersive daydreamer. You go do you. If it is a problem, how big a problem is it? Is it just kind of, oh, I just need to give myself a little extra self-care every once in a while, when this kicks in? Or is it like I really need to seek out professional help yesterday? And everything in between. And then kind of think to yourself, what is your end goal? Goal might shift too, but just sort of, start formulating an idea of what you want wellness to look like. Is that, a life where you don't have these immersive fantasies at all? Is it one where you have achieved balance with them? You don't lock yourself into anything just yet. You kind of have an idea where you want to go and maybe some ideas of how you want to get there. Really need a new plan. So we're going to do medication right at the top just to get it over and done with and out of the way. There is no medication for maladaptive daydreaming. Maladaptive daydreaming really just hasn't been around long enough. There are no studies done on maladaptive daydreamers, trialing medications. You will find mention of medications in some of the papers. There's even a paper on, my God, what was the title? I can't remember what the title was. I'll find it and I'll put it in the description. Anyway, it was a study that asked self-identified maladaptive daydreamers who happened to also be taking medications or using recreational drugs to uh, to self-report their experiences with if that had any effect on their daydreaming. They really didn't find much of anything. It'll be down in the description. You can look at it yourself. But that's just one paper, and these people weren't prescribed the medications and things for their maladaptive daydreaming. In order to get a prescription for something, you need to be diagnosed with something, and maladaptive daydreaming isn't a diagnosis. If you have an underlying cause like anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD, anything like that, your clinician can prescribe you something for that with the symptom of daydreaming in mind. If they know that that is something you want to address, you can talk about that with them. And while they are coming up with your treatment for it, they can keep that in mind, and that's a symptom that you can go back and track. You can go back to them and be like, okay, this it worked really well for this symptom, but it did this with the fantasizing symptom, and that's a big concern for me. Just keep an open dialogue with whoever is prescribing you these medications, because it's a whole process. It's a whole process finding sort of the right cocktail for you. A lot of people will try to self medicate with over the counter drugs or with recreational drug use. There's really not that much to say about that. I mean, if you are deficient in something, you can take supplements to help with that. And if it's a physical problem like that, it might help with the daydreaming. I myself take melatonin. I don't sleep well, and the melatonin helps me. And if I'm more well rested, I have more control of myself, and I won't daydream as much the next day. But that's just for me. It might not work for a lot of other people, especially if sleeping isn't one of their big problems. And for recreational drug use, just be careful with it, because what we don't want to see happen is someone trying to self medicate with whatever substance, legal or otherwise, doesn't matter. You can still hurt yourself by overindulging in this other thing to take care of this other thing that you have going on, and you do not want to swap one bad coping skill for another. So just keep that in mind when you are medicating yourself in any way. And for the love of God, don't take anything dangerous or creepy. All right. Watch out for like grifters and hucksters and shit who sell you sawdust and call it a supplement. It happens all the time. Everybody is going to promise you a cure, and they're all full of bullshit. I really want to put that out there. Anyone who tells you that they know the cure for maladaptive daydreaming is someone you should not listen to. And I'm not talking about the little comments, like the little comments on the subreddit, like, oh, this cured me. Okay, fine, that's their personal experience. But if anybody if anybody has, something to sell you, walk the other way because they are lying. They are lying to you. And I'm not saying that maladaptive daydreaming can't be cured. I am not saying that. I'm saying it's a process that is deeply individual that you can get with your current clinician or, with any clinician out there should you choose to go the therapy route. And everybody who researches maladaptive daydreaming puts their research online for free. Go to the ICMDR and look up all those papers. Not a single one of them is hidden behind a paywall, I don't think. So far, maladaptive daydreaming research has not hidden behind paywalls. Nobody is asking anybody for money. There is no official treatment protocol. It's just the researchers' best, most informed opinion on what can help. And their best, most informed opinion is, um, the things we're going to talk about, go to therapy, practice mindfulness, avoid those triggers or identify those triggers and underlying causes, things like that. Things you might have to pay for. But you will be paying a, certified professional because you'll be going to therapy, not some guy online who says he's cured hundreds of people. He's just a liar. Or she. Not talking about anyone in particular. That was a bit longer of a rant than I meant it to be, but I really want you to take that to heart. There is no magic bullet, and there's nobody who can cure you except you. And you can do it. I know it sounds really overwhelming, and I know a lot of you don't actually have access to clinicians, but there's a few things we can get you started here with that don't cost anything. Mindfulness is one of them, for example. You can Google that right now and find a ton of exercises and articles and guided meditations or whatever. But mindfulness is very versatile. You can integrate it into any lifestyle. If there's something you already like to do, Google that word with the word mindfulness exercise. Like I'm something will probably pop up. Mindfulness exercise for long walks, mindfulness exercise for brushing my teeth. I looked up just the other day for somebody in the Discord. It was like mindfulness exercise for reciting the Quran. And things came up like mindfulness, you can do a lot of stuff with it because it's just the act of being present. A lot of people have this view of meditation that you need to empty your mind. And that's not what the goal is. Don't empty your mind. And it will be hard at first. It's a new habit that needs to be built and sort of integrated into your life, which is why, I said at the beginning that, look up something you already enjoy doing or something you do regularly, and just add mindfulness to it. So you can get it kind of integrated with not too much trouble. But it won't work at first. You won't really notice a difference or anything. Not for a while, but just give it a good try. Just keep doing it and really read up on what mindfulness is. Because, like I said before, you should not be trying to clear your mind. That's not what it is. I can't give or don't want to give a big huge thesis statement here on what mindfulness is, but it's basically you sort of ground yourself in the present and allow yourself to feel those thoughts will come in, you are not clearing your mind, the thoughts come in and you let them go without judgment and just move on to the next thought. They come, they go, you redirect yourself to whatever your point of focus is, if it's your breathing or your body or whatever it is. Just, okay, had that thought, back to my breath. Okay, had that thought, back to my candle, whatever it is. So that's a good one. Being present is the, I don't want to say opposite, but Kind of. It's kind of the opposite of fantasizing. Instead of your letting your mind go anywhere and fall down those rabbit holes, it'll fall down a rabbit hill for a second. Rabbit hill? It really bothered me. I think I said hill. It'll fall down a rabbit hole for a second, but you redirect it. And the more you practice, you've been practicing daydreaming for the better part of your life. Practicing presence. It's going to take a hot minute, just give it some time. Motivation. You're going to want to keep your motivation in mind. Maybe you don't know what it is yet. That's okay. It'll come to you. Now, this is actually attached to motivational interviewing, which is a thing that therapists and clinicians can do with you. It's sort of a tool in their toolbox, and something that they will guide you through. You can do it on your own, though. You can generate your own internal motivation without aid, and it will help you to keep that somewhere close to you where you can be reminded of it, so that when you're laying in bed and you're like fuck it, why bother? You can pull that little nugget out and be like, oh yeah, that's why I bother. I still don't feel like getting up, but I guess maybe I could, and in that way you kind of get through it. Now you're going to want to make this sort of a positive goal. This is not a place to disparage yourself. So the example that we gave was, you want your motivational like statement that you make, the thing that you keep telling yourself, you don't want to make it something like MD makes me a shitty friend, so I'm never going to do it again. That's not going to get you anywhere. That's going to lead to failure. You want to make it something like I'm going to prioritize time with my friends. That is what is important to me. And this is another thing, motivational interviewing or generating an internal motivation, something you can Google without much trouble. There's all kinds of articles about it, and it's one of those things that can, make an impact. We're kind of going for what it's like called the 80/20 law, I think. I can't remember what it's actually called, but I'm sure you've heard of it. So you can look it up. And it's basically, like 80% of your gains come from maybe 20% of your work. So if you know where to focus that 20%, you don't have to work at 100% all the time. Am I explaining this right? Oh my God. I'm sorry if I'm explaining this poorly. The point is, if you can pinpoint, or maybe not even pinpoint, but just kind of get the general area, there are a few small things that you can do that will give you a noticeable amount of progress. Maybe not as much progress as you want. They certainly won't be a cure, but you can start to see, that these things are possible. Finding an internal motivation. It might take a while for you to figure yourself out, especially if you're in the thick of it and you're just feeling really numb right now. But if you put some work into finding that, that will be beneficial to you in the long run and lead to noticeable progress eventually. Putting some practice into something like mindfulness. You probably won't see gains right away. You might think it's stupid and not doing anything, but the things that you practice grow stronger. And what you have been practicing is fantasizing. So that's very strong. And you haven't practiced much, being present. It's unfairly weighted to one side. So it might take you a minute to get the hang of it, but these are things that can be learned that can help. What I want to quickly go over is urge surfing. So this is a mindfulness technique for behavioral addictions. It came out of the University of Washington. A psychologist there, I can't remember his name, Marlett, Merlot, Mattel, something like that. So if you look this up, you will find a bunch of information on it. Don't worry, easily Googleable. We call it the SOBER technique, which stands for stop, observe, breath, expand, respond. So you've identified your triggers, right? And you've decided that there's one you want to address. And you feel it coming on. You can feel the craving. Maybe you already started daydreaming and you caught yourself. Okay. Now pull yourself out. Whatever you're doing, just stop and lean into that feeling. Observe it. Yep. What's it feel like? How strong is it? Where's it coming from? Breath. Focus your attention on your breath. Very common point of focus in mindfulness. Not the only one. If there's something that works better for you, do it. Do whatever helps you. But breath is one you're going to have available to you at all times. And then you want to expand after you focus on your breath a little bit. Sort of expand your thought process into the future. Up here we observed, we were feeling with that craving, and then we stopped, and now we're expanding. Like, okay, what happens if I give in to the craving? How am I going to feel? How am I going to feel later today? Because the answer to how I feel might be real damn good. But how are you going to feel later? Just keep expanding outward. And then respond. You've taken yourself out of the autopilot that you're on. You've interrupted the process. You've looked at the craving, and now you respond. Maybe the way you respond is to give in. Hopefully not. If you're moving towards wellness, eventually your responses will be like, okay, I'm going to carry on with the task that I was doing when this interrupted me. And you can read all about urge surfing, on the internet. Like I said, mindfulness based, which is something that's already recommended for maladaptive daydreaming. Maladaptive daydreaming is believed to be, a behavioral addiction. A lot of people experience it as a behavioral addiction. So this might be particularly helpful to those people. And the last one I want to talk about is journaling. We already talked about this a lot because the whole beginning of this section was about how you should track what you're feeling and how much you're daydreaming and your symptoms and all that, and take note of all those things. So we've already talked a lot about this, but there's still a little bit more to say about it because researchers had maladaptive daydreamers log their daydreaming experience. Just like I showed you before, they had a little sheet thing for them to fill out. I'm so sorry about that noise up there. Anyway, they had sheets. They had time sheets and things for the maladaptive daydreamers to fill out with little headings and stuff of things that they wanted to track for the study. And then something kind of weird happened. A bunch of the participants of the study told them that the journaling stopped their maladaptive daydreaming or reduced it. And that was it. Taking nothing else into account, logging their maladaptive daydreaming helped to reduce it. I guess because it made them more aware of what they were doing. It interrupted, that little autopilot thing. Because when they started daydreaming, they're like, "Oh yeah, I got to write this down." It just made them more aware, and it had a positive impact on them going forward. So I wanted to say that journaling, it's not just handy for figuring your stuff out. It is a reduction technique in and of its own. Also, I wanted to say, if you're somebody who's going to be following the advice of this video and, you start doing what we said at the beginning and start making note of your symptoms and stuff, remember that. Expect that your maladaptive daydreaming might not behave in the way that it normally does because this, for some people, is a reduction technique on its own. You might see a change in your daydreaming habits just by paying more attention to them. It's okay. Don't freak out. When you get to the part where you want to decide what to do, when you're taking stock of everything and wondering how you should go forward, if you decide that you are not a maladaptive daydreamer, that what, actually, I think this is a positive influence on my life, and there's nothing I want to do to address it. That's fine. Just stop tracking it, and everything should return to normal. This isn't going to affect you forever. It's not going to steal your daydreaming away for forever. So you can still track it and you'll notice a disruption, but you don't have to be afraid of that disruption. That's all I wanted to say. Just know that it will come up, okay? But don't be scared of it. And that's the last thing I wanted to cover in this piece. And actually this was kind of the last piece that I had intended on doing, but there's so much to cover with maladaptive daydreaming. And I'm not really qualified to sit here and professionally dissect, studies and really talk about the nitty gritty of those kind of things. But if you have an idea for something that would help you or help other maladaptive daydreamers that can be covered, in one of these little MD 101 videos, then do let me know in the comments because I can do more of these if people are interested in seeing them. But I've covered uh the things that I think are the main things I wanted to get to. But if there's other things that I really should have covered, let me know. And that is it. Maybe, probably, unless people say that there's other stuff I should cover. Uh in which case I'll see you eventually.